This year, I'd like to spend some time reading the Greeks, and it doesn't presuppose any specialized knowledge of the Greeks. And what I want to talk about in particular is the idea of the hero. Uh, in some ways, the most important myth for ancient Greece was the myth of Prometheus, because he stole the fire of the gods and brought them down to human beings because they were not capable of fighting off ferocious predators. And as a result, he was punished by Zeus, chained to a rock, and gruesomely every day vultures would come down, or an eagle would come down, rather. That would be Zeus, and eat his liver. Overnight, it would grow back, and it would happen again. That's kind of a tough sentence. You have to admit that's kind of draconian, but that's the kind of sentence and punishment you could expect from the head of the Greek pantheon. The only thing that gives Prometheus any solace, the thing that prevents that experience from being something like the punishments in Dante's Inferno, is the ace in the hole that Prometheus has. He knows of an ancient prophecy, which he believes to be true, that Zeus and the rest of the Olympians will eventually be overthrown. What that means is gods are just as mortal as we are. They're just a little more temporally extended. And the idea of taking God's place, of displacing the gods, the way Zeus did with his father Kronos, is a quintessentially Greek stance towards the world. In other words, let's push the limits, let's push the envelopes of what human beings can do and what they can aspire to. It's a powerfully attractive humanism. There's a deep optimism about human nature. On the other hand, this optimism about human nature, this self-assurance in undertaking the greatest tasks, easily lends itself to arrogance, which in Greek is hubris, and self-destruction. That's what tragedy's about. But not just tragedy. You'll find that the great figures, the most important of the Greek heroes, actually are probably centered in the Greek epics rather than the Greek tragedies or even comedies. There are more, of course, of the tragedies in existence, but the importance of heroism and of status and of honor is very important, and it changes over time. So the Greek poet Homer, to whom is attributed the Iliad and the Odyssey, was in the business of writing something like an encyclopedia for all of Greece. Everything that you would want to know, that you would teach an upper-class young man, might be found in the stories of Homer. Well, it turns out that that kind of an education has some significant downsides, and among those downsides is the fact that much of the mythology and the magic stuff has to be taken with a grain of salt, and not every young person is able to do that. So Homer creates the ideals of Greek culture as well. And if you look at the Iliad, this is clearly from a much more primitive stratum of Greek history, right? In other words, the stories that got sewn together, into a coherent plot in the Iliad probably existed in an oral form for many centuries earlier. It's the pulling them together and creating coherence that's great about Homer or whoever it is that was actually doing this. The Iliad asks the question, what makes a man excellent? In other words, if someone has arete, what does it look like? And the answer is Achilles. The first line tells us that the poem is about the wrath of Achilles, and he does get awfully angry during the course of the action, but it's about much more than that, and so many important elements in Greek culture, which will be important to us later as we read Plato. And as I unpack this for you, I'll be making references to this stuff. The most important thing about Achilles is that he's one-dimensional, right? Think about, let's go to the readings. Book 1 of the Iliad. As is traditional, an epic starts in medias res, which means in the middle of things. You can't start in the middle if you're writing an epic. You need a flashback later on to tell us what's going on. So, we open the poem with a conflict and a problem. And these conflicts and these difficulties reflect a great deal about the way these very ancient Greeks viewed the world. I mean, on the assumption that Homer gets written down about 800 BC, I gotta think that it was pulled together over a period of centuries, and my guess would be 1400 or 1500 BC for the original hero stories that were told around the campfire, or more likely chanted around the campfire. In other words, we would sing the song of brave Ulysses or murderous, fleet-footed Achilles. But whatever we're doing, we're trying to figure out where can we find human excellence. And one answer would be on the battlefield. I mean, it clarifies a lot of things. It's hard to be hypocritical on the battlefield, and it's even hard to tell lies or to be crafty on the battlefield. So much is attributable to main strength, as in the case of Achilles. Everything else seems to be relatively unimportant. So let's assume that for the Iliad, Achilles is our main character. What's he like? Well, first of all, he's impulsive. They haven't invented self-control yet. I know that may sound unusual, and it is. But look, the virtue of self-control, rather than just, say, stabbing someone who looks at you in the wrong way, takes up a lot of development in the course of human history. Most men, particularly, young adult men, are too full of testosterone and too light on brains to be easily subdued. So, when we look at Achilles, in the first book of the Iliad, Agamemnon is angry. And Agamemnon is a jerk of the first order. I mean, a damn fool. And he's so consumed with his own status and with his own arrogance and with his own self-congratulation that he is wildly out of touch with the world, and he cannot accept responsibility except for being the boss. Anything that goes wrong, he finds someone else to blame. Now, turns out Agamemnon has among his division of the treasure, because Troy hasn't fallen yet, but they still have captured quite a bit. He takes a slave girl And it turns out that the girl's father is a priest of Apollo. Now, think about the conception of nature that we're dealing with here. An epidemic strikes the Greeks, and back then you don't look to scientific medicine. You look to a soothsayer, a priest, somebody that can tell you what the gods are thinking and why they're doing this, because the gods are assumed to be behind it. Okay, the priest is scared, so he gets Achilles to stand up for him, and then when he's asked by Agamemnon, he says, look, you've been disrespectful to Apollo's priest, and Apollo's angry about it. You have to give his daughter back to him, even though you said you wouldn't, and you were just being mean. It was just pointless and arrogant. But if you don't, Apollo's going to keep on sending down his arrows, which happens to take the form of people stricken with an epidemic, and many dying from it. So, Agamemnon gets quite angry. He doesn't believe that he has been honestly treated by the soothsayer. But since Achilles is backing him up, there's no question of starting violence, because Achilles, if he gets violent, will kill every breathing person there. He will kill Agamemnon's guard, he will kill the rest of the heroes, and he will make it a point to kill Agamemnon. He was just about to do that, which would deny us a wonderful story, when Athena came down and put her hand on Achilles' great gnarly hand as he reaches for his sword. And she says, Achilles, don't do that. Believe me, we'll take care of Agamemnon later. But for now, I want you to understand that the idea of Achilles being self-restrained, in this case, requires divine intervention. That's how much a creature of direct simplicity Achilles is. Achilles is extremely eloquent, but the eloquence is not derived from studying Aristotle's rhetoric or studying with the sophists. His eloquence comes from the fact that he says nothing he doesn't believe. And he says everything that he does believe, apparently. So Achilles turns out to be an extremely simple individual. Not very complicated, but he has the advantage of being the Terminator. You can think, when I've taught the Iliad and Odyssey in the past, almost always the young men among the undergraduates, like the Iliad, women are for the most part turned off by it, but they do like the Odyssey. So I found a difference in the sexes and how they seem to like this. And you can think of this as an ancient action movie, right? But here, what we're doing is creating the ideal Greek. And like Homer's two poems, it comes in two phases. I might guess that the Odyssey represents a cycle of hero stories connected to the earlier cycles of stories, which still hadn't pulled together yet. But these second cycle of stories reflect a much more sedentary, a much more mercantile mode of living. So initially, in 14 or 1400 BC, the Greeks were like Vikings. They're pirates, essentially. That's what Thucydides talks about in Book 1 of his history. But after a couple of centuries, they found advantageous islands and places on the mainland to settle down. They found that trading was actually more lucrative than raiding. They, of course, were perfectly willing to defend themselves or to steal if they had the possibility. But what is important is that this second poem gives us a new hero. This new hero is going to be Odysseus. Okay? Now, we find in Book 8 or Book 9 of the Iliad one of the funniest subtlest, most poetic scenes that I've seen in any epic. It's just so smart and so understated, and it's all about what doesn't get said there. You have to imagine the expression on people's faces as they are throwing sidelong glances to one another. Here's the deal. Achilles, instead of murdering Agamemnon and everyone in his guard and everyone in the locality, just says, "I'm not working with you anymore. I will not take your arrogance and your destructive conduct. You took my slave girl to replace yours, but you had no right to do that. I had no quarrel with Apollo. You're just trying to prove who's the toughest, who's number one." And in some ways, it's the ethos of the street gang. You disrespected me. I was tempted to shoot you, but self-control intervened. Whether that's a goddess or not, you can leave open. But Achilles feels disrespected. And you see, you don't disrespect Achilles because he's only here to gain the greatest possible glory, even though he knows about the prophecy that he will be killed here. In exchange for that, he will get undying glory. And he decides, that's the way I want to live. Not live quietly at home, let's go become famous, and let's kill everything in sight. Okay. Now, when Achilles says, look, I'm not fighting for you anymore, I'm going to spend a couple of days getting ready, and then I'm just going to sail home. And I'm going to take my myrmidons, my soldiers, and, you can see if you're able to take Troy without me. It's like a really great quarterback saying, look, I can walk from this team. As a matter of fact, I am walking. And that actually can create a tremendous problem for Agamemnon and his big ego. So, the Greeks are fighting against the Trojans, and Hector, the head of the Trojan army, the greatest warrior of Troy, who is at least a match for other Greek heroes, he does very well, and he routs the Greeks several times, and the Greeks are in very bad shape because they can't call upon the near invincible Achilles. So Nestor, our figure of old, seasoned wisdom, he says to Agamemnon, I'm sorry to have to bring this up, but it's the elephant in the room. Without Achilles, we have no chance. And now Agamemnon can see that, but he doesn't want to admit that he was wrong. So he says, you're right. I must have been mad or possessed at the time because ordinarily I wouldn't make such a terrible gaffe. And so Nestor says, of course not. Knowing, of course, that he's just dodging being stupid or the accusation of being stupid and self-centered. That will come out later when he reunites with Clytemnestra. So Nestor says, let's get a couple of ambassadors from great King Agamemnon to the angry and isolated Achilles. Now, what's wonderful about this is you have to imagine the speech, the action, and the double meanings. Nestor chooses Odysseus because he's real smart. He chooses Phoenix because he used to be the tutor of Achilles. And he also chooses Ajax because Ajax is one of the greatest and most respected heroes, and the hope is that he will be able to say, if I would do the deal, I would accept Agamemnon's ransom because he's going to pay you all this great stuff, a whole bunch up front. You get the girl back that was taken, and you get a whole bunch of stuff once we destroy Troy. All right. So I'm sorry about that. I'm digitally difficult. So they're bringing him gifts as a kind of consolation prize and a kind of not quite apology from Agamemnon. And so Achilles allows them in, and what's important here is that he's very agreeable, very hospitable towards them, which is, of course, not just not just customary, but a very big element in Greek society. So he has Patroclus, his companion, get a dinner ready for his guests, and they just sit down, and Nestor begins talking, and then Phoenix begins talking, and Odysseus is, at least initially, somewhat reserved, but then he ends up explaining the proposition that Agamemnon was offering. Finally, of course, there's Phoenix's old tutor, and there's great shaggy Ajax, the giant, the Hulk, and he's nodding vigorously, but he's not all that bright. He's just there because he's earnest and serious like Achilles. But nobody is as earnest and serious as Achilles. And the reason why is because he's not a complicated person. Very much the opposite. There's a sense in which Achilles doesn't even have an internal life. I know he's supposed to, everyone does. But the idea is that the discrepancy between Achilles' body and Achilles' mind is astonishing. I mean, the disjunction between these two things. None of the ambassadors knew all that well what his mental life was like. And everybody was impressed with his eloquence because every word he said was sincere. Like a 4-year-old, he has no filter. He said, if he thinks it, he says it, and that's it. If you don't like that, he will kill you. So he has that combination of action and thought here. But it's a very primitive kind of thought. So I would call you Achilles version 1.0 of the Greek hero. It's an early primitive warrior culture. And what they mean by a hero, a man who possesses arete, and I would emphasize man here because we're not going to get interesting female characters until we get to the Odyssey and then to the tragedies. But here in the Iliad, this is a man's space and a man's time because this is all about the clash of muscle until Odysseus cracks the problem open by making it a clash of brain. So our version 1.0 of the Greek hero, he has about a dozen or so characteristic activities. And each of these characteristic activities corresponds to a unique state of mind, a particular state of mind that Achilles is in. To give an example, all right, when Achilles is tired, Achilles goes to sleep. There's no need to say, Achilles, are you tired? All you need to do is look at Achilles. If he's still awake, then he's not tired. What you see is what you get. Achilles, if he's sexually aroused, he has sex with the slave girl that much of this contention is about. Remember, the slave girl is not an object of romantic attachment. We haven't got romantic love yet. It's a marker of status. And that's why they're at odds. She's a poker chip, not the real issue. So Achilles is very hospitable, and he invites the ambassadors in, and he hears them out. And I'm reminded of another event when Achilles is fighting a little later on in the Iliad, but he captures someone or bests someone at spear fighting, and the guy throws away his shield, falls on his knees, throws down his sword, and says, "Please take me captive. My family will ransom me." And Achilles stopped and thought about that. And then he said, "Well, you see, here's the thing. I'm not an accountant. I'm a hero, and I'm not leaving this place anyway, so I'm not really interested in making money." And then Achilles impales him with a spear. What that means is Achilles knows that he has the lifespan of a mayfly if he stays here, so he has to have some good reason. And accumulating wealth isn't it. Accumulating honor and kalos, which is glory, kudos, which is glory, which is very, very important. That he sees as the acme of human achievement, to be the greatest, most destructive warrior anyone has ever seen, and who willingly gave up his life so that he could feed his egoistic hope of being remembered forever. Knowing that he's going to die at Troy is ironically an attempt at immortality. Okay, so Achilles has a few mental states, and they correspond to a few characteristic activities. So if Achilles is insulted, Achilles refuses to fight. If Achilles gets angry, Achilles kills people. If Achilles is hungry, Achilles eats. Do you see the idea that there's a one-to-one correspondence between simple mental states that you could probably replicate in some invertebrate animal? That's a little bit of the quality of the mental activity here. You have to imagine Achilles, first of all, as being a great, big, hugely built guy. Imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger early in his career. I mean, gigantic muscles and protected by a magic potion, the River Leyte. So he's pretty much, he's the Terminator of the ancient world. And a culture that chooses to elevate a Bronze Age Terminator to the high point of human achievement is a very limited culture, right? It's a primitive culture that's mostly destructive and probably not sedentary. Primitive group of people. In the embassy, he does something like that disdain for ransom. He says, "Look, I'm not here to make money, and it's beneath me." There's a Greek term for money grubbing, banausia. It's beneath me to accept any kind of bribe. I should have cut that guy's head off, but I didn't. I'm just going home because I don't have to put up with this. So the embassy fails, and before they go, Achilles says something very revealing. You have to imagine him telling Ajax, most probably, looking at him saying, "Oh, how I hate, like the gates of Hades itself, a man who thinks one thing and says another." Now, Achilles has only the greatest dislike and disapprobation and rage for liars. Now, he's not some sort of Kantian who wants to obey universal moral rules. Rather, Achilles finds lies baffling. And when he is faced with them, he can't detect them because he doesn't see the possibility of telling lies. Achilles has not told a lie throughout the entire story of the Iliad and won't tell any lies when he gets encountered in the underworld in the Odyssey. But the point is, what you see is what you get with Achilles. In a way, he doesn't have an inside, or the inside and the outside of him are the same thing. So Achilles says, I hate the liar. Now, you have to imagine Phoenix, his teacher, and Ajax looking at him and being quite serious and earnest as well. But Nestor, the old wise man, and Odysseus are stepping back there, and I imagine Odysseus stroking his beard saying, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what kind of person says one thing and thinks another? And then look over, slightly alarmed at Nestor, saying, good Lord, or not good Lord, but what have we here? You have to imagine what did I say? A Formula One race car with a lawnmower engine in it. Good God, he has the mental development of a 10-year-old. Perhaps not even a 10-year-old. And he's built like the Terminator. And you can be sure that what Achilles is doing is completely agreeing, nodding sagely. And Nestor is going to say, oh yeah, we got a live one here, of course. You're on a separate path. And the reason why Achilles hates liars is worth thinking about. Achilles hates liars because when you lie, you have to have two things in your head at the same time. You have to have the real fact of the matter, which you are obscuring, and you have to have a verbal account of the matter, which is not the case, which is false. Now, Odysseus does this out of habit, as you'll see when he, next chapter in the Odyssey, in the Iliad, when he, goes out with Diomedes and they catch Dolan and all that. The point is he's crafty and he lies at least half the time. Achilles, on the other hand, cannot see that in Odysseus because he's unable to distinguish truth tellers from liars. And the reason why is that it boggles his mind. See, Achilles is surrounded by people that say one thing and think another. Having two things in their mind at the same time enrages Achilles because that's one thing too many for him. He has one idea at a time. I am hungry, I will eat. I am angry, I will kill you. He's the simplest human tool, right? He's a blunt instrument. But on the other hand, we didn't hire him to do our taxes, right? Or to program computers for us. We want a guy in this context who's just like Achilles. He slays people and he's really good at it. He's temperamental and childish, but what difference does it make? He's on our side and he's the key to winning. So that's what Achilles version 1.0 is like. And the only tiny advance that he makes is at the very end of the book, when he after he killed Hector and disgraced the body, and in addition to that, Priam comes and begs him for the body of his son, and he breaks down crying because this reminds Achilles of his own father, and this appears to be the first time in Achilles' life that he has ever asked to pose the question to himself, what would it be like to have someone else's experience? What would it be like to have someone else's feelings? And then he thinks about poor, sad old men whose sons are dead. This old man is sad and crying. Soon my father's going to be sad and crying. That makes me want to be sad and cry. So this is the Odyssey, the internal Odyssey of Achilles. What does he do? He moves from being not fully interiorized, there's a one-to-one correspondence between thought and action, to hypotheticals like, what would it be like to be, say, that guy that I impaled even though he offered me a bunch of money? That's a kind of an interesting thought. I had never considered that. I'm tired, now I'll go to sleep. One idea in his head at a time. Now let's compare that with the Odyssey. There we get the version 2.0 of the Greek hero. Instead of the Terminator, what we get is a mix of brains and brawn. So if he's got to fight it out, Odysseus can do that. He's a great competitor, a great hero. On the other hand, if you need a problem solved in an intelligent way rather than a violent way, Achilles is particularly adept at that. We find out in a flashback that Achilles was the one who invented the stratagem of the Trojan horse. And the horse, after the Greeks appeared to have left, the Trojans brought the horse into their city, and this is what won the day, because they broke out at night and opened the gates, and this was the end of Troy. Now, if the Greeks had waited for Achilles to think this up, they would still be waiting. He has not the wit to think up a thing like that, but Achilles does. He represents the move from raider in the Iliad to trader as an outlook. Think of it as a cycle of stories, still quite heroic, but you don't get quite the same pitched battles, but a cycle of stories from a sedentary group of people that likes to explore and plant new cities and conduct large-scale trade and make money at that. It's actually a lot safer, more predictable, quite a bit easier than trying to be pirates or the Vikings forever. So Odysseus looks at things in a calculating way, all right? And he's going to be able to disguise himself when he goes back home to Ithaca in a way that Achilles just couldn't. If both of them were to go back home with Ithaca, to Ithaca, the first time someone disrespected them, Achilles would say something ironic. And then, or rather, Odysseus would say something ironic, and then Achilles would kill everyone in the vicinity because he just loses temper. So, Odysseus doesn't need the goddess to show up in order to get him to show self-restraint. Can you see how the idea of what human excellence is has extended? And now it involves the ability to solve problems mentally, not just with the response, I will kill you. So, version 2.0 of the Greek hero, at the end of his career, he gets back home to Ithaca, and he reflects on his life. And it turns out that when he had just left Troy, he pointlessly destroyed a city and raped and killed and murdered. And he also had a run-in with the Cyclops. And it wasn't enough just to outsmart the Cyclops. He had to be full of hubris. And that Greek hubris will get Greek heroes every time. As he leaves, he shouts out to Cyclops, who's dumb. It wasn't no man that stabbed you in your single eye. It was me, Odysseus. And then laughing, he and his men sail away. But Cyclops' daddy was Poseidon, and he was unhappy that his son had been blinded. So he initially intended to kill Odysseus, but Zeus intervened and said, look, you can knock him around the Mediterranean for 10 years or so, but eventually you got to let him go back to Ithaca. I have plans. And the will of Zeus is fate, so that's where the Odyssey really begins in a way, because he is an inveterate warrior, he's a murderer, he's a killer, and he is full of arrogance and hubris, and if he doesn't cleanse himself of this, he is going to go home and things will not go properly. So the Odyssey is a series of stripping downs where Odysseus loses his ships, he loses his booty, he loses his crew, eventually loses his clothes. He's got nothing. So he gets stripped down and rebuilt. You couldn't strip down and rebuild Achilles because he's not complicated enough for that. But Odysseus is. So when he goes home, he reflects on what it is that warriors stand for and what violence should mean for a well-developed hero. And he says, after he kills the suitors, to Eurycleia, who's one of his servants, who's very happy and jumping up and down with joy at all these dead suitors and dead maids and all that. And he says, this is key. This is what he learns, analogous to what Achilles learns. What he learns is, it is unholy to vaunt over the bodies of the dead. This refers to Eurycleia's little happy dance with all the corpses, but also it refers back to Achilles' disgracing of Hector's corpse. It is unholy to do that. Finally, we're going to find out about the version 3.0 of the Greek hero. It turns out he's named Socrates. And Plato intends to literally supersede Homer because he believes that Homer, while an extraordinarily gifted poet, has miseducated Greece. So the version 3.0 that we're going to get, the improvement on Achilles and Odysseus, is a new hero of soul rather than body. He's a hero of knowledge who fights all comers verbally, and instead of killing them, improves their life. So he is a warrior of truth, and he is a warrior of virtue. So he has military virtues, but he applies them not to seizing property or to destroying things, but to improving himself and his city. Plato's seventh letter, for those of you who got a chance to read it, I don't know if it's legitimate or not. We know that scholars know that just about every other one of the letters is probably a later forgery. There's controversy about this seventh letter sometimes. It's worth reading because what Plato is saying is, look, I have a secret doctrine. I have some kind of esoteric doctrine. It's a little bit like rational and Gnostic at the same time. It sounds like anyway. He just says, look, there are limits on what you can do with language, which sounds to me a lot like Wittgenstein eventually. But he says, look, there are 4 things you can do to move along towards knowledge of something. But this 5th thing, it's discontinuous, and you need what he calls a flash of insight, which explains nothing whatever. I don't doubt that it's true, because actually once reading Plato's Republic, I had a flash of insight, and I'm going to try and help explain that to you in the next couple of, next 12 months. We're going to read Plato's Republic, and I want you to get a quick overview, quick and dirty read as fast as you can. You won't understand it. You're not supposed to. Just do as I recommend, all right? Then go back, and we're going to read, starting next month, 1 chapter per month, 1 book of the Republic per month. Those of you who are gluttons for punishment are welcome to read Bloom's interpretive essay. That has many good insights into it, except the one that turns out to be wrong. I'll explain that to you when I get the chance. The Republic is a life-changing book, and I guarantee that no matter how many times you have read it, and no matter how hard you read it, you will not have seen, because as far as I know, it's never been published by anybody else. I could be wrong, though, since the literature on Platonism is so huge. But yeah, I think when I was 20 years old, I figured it out and cracked the code. And we'll see if I'm right, but I'm going to give you a different kind of interpretation. I also have a Republic outline. So on Substack, if you want a bit of a structure that might make it a little easier for you to follow, it's there, and I think it's very handy. I want you to read the peripheral readings along with the one book of the Republic every month, because that background is going to be necessary to understand what Plato is doing, right? And this is what I would regard as the bare minimum, all right, that will allow you to take on what I think is the greatest book ever written without completely being overwhelmed. I think I can make good on my claims about this book. I must have read it at least 50 times. I haven't read it recently, but this is something I know well enough so that, I actually have the outline in my head anyway. So you could find out about Plato's seventh letter. Maybe he has an esoteric doctrine. He tries to talk about these greatest metaphysical, ultimate, ideal things, which are called forms, and I'll explain to you what that is. But he also seems somewhat chastened, which is, I guess, what we would expect as a thinker grows older, writer grows older. And Plato's seventh letter invites us to look beyond the literal interpretation and to see the connections between Platonic dialogues, as well as the connection between the Platonic dialogues and the other greatest achievements of Periclean Athens. So, we're going to read some tragedy, some comedy. We're going to read, most importantly, we're going to read ancient physics. Now, I think ancient pre-Socratic physics is just too cool for school. You will like this stuff, or at least I hope you will, but it's mind-boggling. But the invention of natural science is a really cool topic, and that's one of the things I'm focusing on in the history of the world that I'm writing. And the other really cool thing is China, about 300 years later, also has an analogous scientific revolution. And not only is ancient Greek physics really cool, ancient Chinese physics is really cool. So I'm going to have to limit my discussions to ancient Greek physics, but it's just an amazing set of achievements that happened in natural science, and from natural science it jumped over into social science, the human sciences, because they're ultimately not separable. And I'm going to explain why Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all decided that this would be a good time to get smart and rational all at once. It's not that people were not smart or rational prior to this, but rather that they were in a desperate situation and they had to be smart. They had to be rational because the first scientific revolution caused a corresponding revolution in all the other domains of culture that include things like religion, politics, ethics, law, literature, history. Social science gets born in response to this first scientific revolution. So what I'm hoping to do this year is to introduce beginners to a very hard book and to reread a book that I happen to love very much. I hope that it will be life-changing for you the way it was for me. But in order to see what I see there, you have to pay your dues and read a whole bunch of other Greek background stuff. So, congratulations. I'm happy that you're here. And I'd like to have an open Zoom discussion at 8 o'clock tonight. I hope you all get a chance to read this text. It's a wonderful text. Good night, or goodbye for a while.